Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to another fantastic Peach Pundit Podcast where a couple guys who are missing our fearless leader, Jason Pye, are going to get together and talk about Georgia politics because there has been a lot to talk about. And
really,
we would be remiss if we didn't lead off the show with the biggest news of the week, which is that Stacey Abrams has published a new book and it looks amazing.
Yes.
I'm going
to
hold this up. This is Stacey's Extraordinary Words. And now my screen froze. So yeah. Stacey's Extraordinary Words. That's the name of the book. She actually wrote this under her own name, Buzz.
Yeah.
Not a pen name this time. So it's not pornographic and it doesn't feature Doug Collins.
That we know of. I mean, I haven't read it.
Well,
I don't know if you've read it. I haven't read it. That could be some of Stacey's amazing words is Doug Collins.
We do know that Stacey is capable of using some very extraordinary words, especially when she's claiming voter fraud that didn't exist.
And then going on Rachel Maddow's show and saying, I never challenged the results of the election.
Right. Which is like, well, she created a whole nonprofit around it. I mean, the ability to say one thing and then forget, depending on the audience,
right,
is, what's the word? Extraordinary.
Yes.
So
yes.
Good luck on your launch of your book, Stacey Abrams, and I will not be buying it, but good luck to you anyway.
I hope she sells 1 million copies. Really. I mean, she's a talented writer, talented person. I'm sure she'll sell a lot of books, and good for her.
Right. So, I mean,
of America on display.
It's like the biggest news of the week, really, honestly. Stacey has a new book.
I think it shows you what you can do when you don't have primary opposition.
Oh, well, speaking of primaries, since, there's other big news around that. I don't know if anybody's heard this or not, but Charlice Byrd, my state rep, has decided to challenge my state senator, Kay Kirkpatrick. And she's been making calls. Representative Byrd had served for 8 years. Mm-hmm. She was beaten by Michael Caldwell, took the entirety of Michael Caldwell's term off, came back after Michael retired and won again. And after serving one term in the House, has decided to challenge Kay Kirkpatrick in the new sort of Cobb-centric state Senate seat. But it goes all the way up to my house. Mm-hmm. I'm right on the edge of the border of that district. And Kay Kirkpatrick is a state senator who replaced, I believe, Judson Hill. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when Judson
ran for Congress.
Yeah, I think Judson ran for Congress against Barry Loudermilk. And when he did, he vacated the seat. And now Kay won that seat. She has been representing that district. Mm-hmm. Which is far more moderate than Cherokee County. Living in Cherokee County and representing Cherokee County, I can tell you that she's in for a bit of a culture shock. And I think that is what Representative Byrd is sensing right now.
Yeah, I mean, this will be interesting because so I guess I haven't looked at the numbers. I don't know how many votes are in Cherokee versus how many votes in Cobb. Do you know that?
It's pretty close. Okay. But the part of Cobb is a fairly conservative part of Cobb.
Yeah.
Right. So, there's an incumbency advantage that Representative Byrd would have to overcome. But when I saw that district, I thought, wow. I think I said this on this podcast when I saw that district was welcome to Cherokee, Kay Kirkpatrick.
Yeah. She may or may not be happy about that, especially now.
Right. Well, I mean, look, Cherokee County is a very cheap place to represent if you're conservative, right? You can get away with spending on a state house race $20,000, $30,000 if you're conservative. Mm-hmm. If you are a state senator and you're conservative, $30,000, $50,000 somewhere in there for a race, a contested race. If you're conservative, if you are not a conservative, you're going to spend $500,000.
Yeah.
And I can point to Brandon Beach, who is consistently challenged because the people here feel like he is not a conservative.
Right.
And he is spending $500,000 every 2 years to fend off
Trying to-
the latest challenger,
Right.
who lives in Cherokee County, and and Brandon lives in Fulton. But I think Senator Kirkpatrick's going to be in that same vein. If she wants to represent Cherokee County, she's either going to have to move very far to her right from where she is now, or she's going to have to spend $500,000 every 2 years to fend off whoever wants to challenge her from here.
Well, that's going to be interesting because they each have one more legislative session before this actually takes place to demonstrate their conservatism, I suppose I should say.
The biggest challenge Senator Kirkpatrick's going to have is that she walked on the heartbeat bill, and she did not only walk on it. She apparently, I'm told by another state senator, issued a statement saying that had she been there, she would have voted no.
Yeah, that's going to cause a problem. Because Charlice, I served with her her first time before Michael Caldwell defeated her. She was a very conservative legislator.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I haven't looked at her voting record since she got back. I would assume it's in the vein that it was before. So.
Well, she did vote against the maps.
Interesting.
There is that as well. But so since we're talking about all the big news, we've buried the lead enough. I think we've teased this out.
Really?
I think Jason would be very angry with us that we did not lead with the actual biggest news of the week. And that is that I am we'll just hide that for a second. No, the biggest news of the week is that David Perdue finally stopped nibbling around the edges and went whole hog and decided to announce that he is challenging Brian Kemp for the Republican nomination for governor of Georgia. Buzz?
Yeah. I watched his little introduction video, and a couple things jumped out at me. First of all, I got the impression, he's making the claim, and of course we saw this. Newt Gingrich wrote an article a few weeks back. We talked about it on the podcast that only David Perdue can unite the Republican Party. David Perdue in his little introductory video said that's why he was running, that the GOP was divided. Then he went on to say it wasn't personal, but then blamed Brian Kemp for him losing the January 5th runoff. That was a new one. I know MAGA World blames Brian Kemp for all sorts of things, but I've been told by people who know that up until recent, not that long ago, that since his loss, up until just moments ago, David Perdue had been blaming Donald Trump for losing, and so the switch to blaming Brian Kemp is a new position that the former senator is taking.
A position that he was probably required. Yeah.
Yeah. When Brian Kemp, as I recall, campaigned pretty vigorously for David Perdue. Eric Erickson and many others have pointed out just this past summer at the Republican convention, David Perdue introduced Brian Kemp at the Republican convention. And Brian Kemp himself has said publicly that Perdue had promised him he would not run against, looked him in the face, looked him in the eye, man to man, and said, "I'm not going to run against you." And now here he is running against him. It's all, I don't know. A lot of folks, I don't know about your experience, Scott. A lot of people that I've talked to, there's some anger at Perdue, quite a bit of anger at Perdue, and a lot of shock. Yeah, they can't really believe that this is happening.
I'm going to read a post that was made by one of the plaintiffs in the Kraken lawsuit, because this was extraordinary to me. This was one of the individuals who decided to put their name on a lawsuit challenging the results and trying to get the election overturned. Right. They were represented by Sidney Powell. Like they believe full bore in the truth of the stolen election theory. Okay. This was her response, right? I think Perdue has shown us the absolute meaning of betrayal. He obviously knows nothing about friendship, nor does he care about the Pandora's box he's opened. Of course, Brian is angry. Who wouldn't be? I hope we don't have to see that fake hat and jean jacket. And I'm glad I voted for Kingston in 2014.
Wow. Wow.
This is somebody who was part of the lawsuit to overturn the election, and that was her reaction to, I mean, to your point, Buzz. Yeah. What I have seen is a whole bunch of people saying this is bad for the party. Of course, now you and we're in different circles, right? We're not rank and file members. We're right. Sort of insiders. We know who the party activists are. We know who the grassroots workers are. We know who the party officials are. We know who all the elected officials are, and we know them by name. We know them by face. If we walked up into them, they would say hello to us, right? We're not some political outsider people, you know. So we have maybe a different perspective than the person who lives 4 houses down from me, who doesn't have this perspective. But my Twitter feed, my Facebook feed, my social media has been, why is he doing this?
Yeah.
And the answer is over and over again, because Donald Trump wants vengeance.
Yeah.
Donald Trump and Brian Kemp had been sideways for quite some time. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think there's a certain amount of grifter-esque type of behavior from certain people who are probably close to David Perdue, saying, you got this, you got this, you got this. And they're failing him by reminding him that he just lost pretty badly to a guy who is not even close to the caliber of politician that Stacey Abrams is. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you rank Stacey Abrams and Jon Ossoff, Buzz?
I mean, look, Stacey Abrams is you and I both serve with her. She's a very smart person. We've said that over and over again. She's an incredibly skilled politician. And I think you saw 3.5 years ago, when it took everything Brian Kemp had to defeat her. He ran as good a race as I think he could have run. She ran a great race, and she outperformed expectations and did many things that Democrats in the state of Georgia had not been able to do in a long, long time. And so, yeah, she's, this is not disrespectful to Jon Ossoff. It's just Stacey Abrams is a very, very, very strong candidate.
She uses extraordinary words.
She does. Yeah, because she's an extraordinary candidate, I guess
she
we should say.
Yes.
She is. She has built, and people across the political spectrum acknowledge this. She has built a very strong grassroots vote, get out the vote operation that helped Joe Biden win the state of Georgia last year.
Right.
So,
and the big takeaway, I mean, and with all due respect to Senator Ossoff, she's 10 times the talent and skill level. I mean, we're talking about the difference between a major leaguer and a guy that came up from Able, and she's way better. And Jon Ossoff completely emasculated David Perdue in that first debate. I mean, he got him flustered. He got him to a point where David Perdue was staring straight ahead, straight into the camera, and Jon Ossoff's doing this, looking right at him, and he's just taking him down and taking him down and taking him down and taking him down. And you can see the color immediately drain from Perdue's face, and his cheeks are a little off center now because he's a little older than he was 8 years ago or 6 years ago. And he just looked old, and he looked like he just couldn't handle this young whippersnapper beating his ass.
Yeah.
And that was Jon Ossoff.
Yeah.
And if you can't handle Jon Ossoff to the point where in the next debate, you don't even show up.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to trust you with Stacey Abrams?
Yeah.
Because you are a flawed candidate, sir. I mean, and that's the start of it with David Perdue being a flawed candidate.
Yeah, and I think, look, that is going to be, obviously, he's trying to make the claim that he can unite the Republican Party, whereas Brian Kemp cannot. And part of that is he's going to have to make the case that he can beat Stacey. If he wants, you want to unseat Brian Kemp, you want to knock Brian Kemp out, the incumbent governor out, you're going to have to convince people that you can do that you can beat Abrams, when Brian Kemp is the only person who has ever run against Stacey Abrams who has actually defeated her.
Right.
So it's going to be a tough, look, we don't know what's going to happen, we got 7 months roughly till the primary takes place. A lot that it's going to be a long 7 months for Republicans in the state of Georgia. I can tell you.
Look, it's just brutal. It's just, I mean, that's the bad thing is, and we're going to have to talk about stock trades again, because the totally exonerated ad that he ran actually hurt him. Yeah, but it's going to come up. They're going to use it, so we need to talk about it. And there is no doubt that on the day you received a briefing, you bought $185,000 worth of 3M stock, which makes PPE stuff like.
And look, it's he was exonerated, so it's not illegal.
Totally exonerated, but it doesn't matter if it's illegal or not.
Right. It's
whether or not it's perceived as fair or right by the voters.
Yes. And that's one major complaint that people have with Congress, is that they can act on information that they get, and that's a bad thing for the American people, really. And I'm not picking on David Perdue. Kelly Loeffler did it. It hurt her in her reelection too, in that runoff too. It hurt her too.
And they'll double down on it again, and he'll have to run ads where he says I'm totally exonerated. And you know what? That's just let's just have a candidate that didn't have that happen at all. Yeah. No, and just move on. Right. Because that's the problem with David Perdue. But why are you running when this guy Kemp has been so demonstrably and objectively successful? Yeah. Right. I mean, unemployment around 3%. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine that in a normal times, let alone during a pandemic? Yeah. 17% increase in revenue year over year for the quarter. And he did that while he cut income taxes. Yeah. Twice, by the way. He cut spending 10% across the board. He gave huge pay raises to teachers and law enforcement officers. Let's not forget, he passed a heartbeat bill. Yep. It's looking more and more like it's going to become the law.
Well, this gets to the point. I got a call yesterday from a reporter from the Daily Beast.
Me too, but I didn't return it.
I did. And one of the first things that pops into my mind, and this is one of the things I told the reporter. I lived in the 7th Congressional District back in the early 2000s after the last reapportionment in Georgia, when Bob Barr fell into the trap set for him by Roy Barnes. He jumped into the 7th Congressional District that was represented by John Linder, anchored in Gwinnett and stretched across that northern crescent. I think you
all the way to me. I lived in it. I lived in it.
Stretched all the way around to Paulding County as well. Barry Loudermilk, oddly enough, was the chairman of the Republican Party in Paulding County at the time. I was chairman of the Republican Party in Gwinnett County back in that day. And what I explained to the reporter, that was a particular nasty race that divided our party in Gwinnett County for a long time. We suffered greatly for that for a long time, because a lot of people went for the flashy Bob Barr versus the John Linder, who was
You're the only person who's ever described Bob Barr as flashy, but go ahead. Go ahead.
That's how he tried to portray himself. He talked about how he was this awesome guy who did all these wonderful things, and John Linder was ineffective. And John Linder was a different politician, no doubt about it, behind the scenes guy who worked hard and got a lot of stuff done and was very, very influential. And got his done. They did two different approaches. But what I explained to the reporter was the reason the race was so nasty is because if you looked at them, if you compared where they stood on the issues, they agreed with each other 90% of the time. So what's left to argue about? Personal matters and style and so forth that divide people and make people mad. David Perdue and Brian Kemp agree philosophically on a lot of stuff. What's left to debate? Donald Trump. And so this race, and we've seen it in the early days, in the day and a half or 2 days that this race has happened. What's the discussion been about? Donald Trump and matters related to the 2020 election, in which Donald Trump is still butthurt over losing.
Which brings us.
That's what we're going to hear for 7 months. And how is that? I know there are some, let me make this one point, because there are some people who are trying to make this, this will be great. And at the end of this process, we'll be a united party. Newt Gingrich is one of the ones who's trying to say that as a result of this primary, we will be a united party. What I fear is that the reverse will happen. We'll be more divided because it'll all be about. It's not going to be this debate over first principles and wonderful things and awesome visions for the future. It's going to be about Donald Trump because and David Perdue said it in his opening video.
And Donald Trump said it so himself.
Yes.
Right? He had an initial reaction, a well post he made, and then a second post where he endorsed fully David Perdue.
Right.
Which, we'll talk about Vernon in a few minutes, but the impact of Trump has already been felt because we had the Fox 5/Insider Advantage poll that was done. And it's the first poll I've ever seen where they've said, all right, are you for Kemp or Perdue or Candace Taylor or Vernon Jones? And Kemp came out with 41% of the vote.
Right.
And 24%?
I'm looking at it now, 22% undecided. So I said, Kemp 41, Perdue 22.
Yeah.
Vernon Jones Perdue, 11, 22. Candace Taylor 4, 22 undecided.
Right. And then they repolled the same group and said, all right, now that you know that Donald Trump is endorsing David Perdue, the numbers dropped to 34, 10.
4 for Taylor. Candace Taylor, she's got her 4%. And she's hanging tough with that.
Right. And she's, her 4% or her 4%. So that's the Trump effect, right? 18 points, 18-point swing. And that's before we start talking about the qualifications of each candidate, whether or not either one did well in the position that they had, or that they ran a really crappy senatorial race. We haven't had that conversation at all. We have a tied race, essentially, according to this poll. They had 500 likely Republican voters. And this is where we are. That's what we know. The Trump effect is not overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's not an automatic win. And that's what every politician in Georgia should be looking at right now. Is 18 points a huge swing? Absolutely. Is it scary as hell? Yeah, it is. Is it manageable? Yeah, it is.
Right. And you look at, all right, so obviously if you're Brian Kemp, you look at that poll and you think, man, I'm the incumbent sitting at 34%, not ideal. If you're David Perdue, you're thinking, man, because if you remember back a couple months ago, the Trump PAC, Save America or whatever it's called, put out a poll that showed that the race would essentially flip on its heels, and that David Perdue would be sitting with Trump's endorsement. David Perdue would be at, I may have the numbers wrong, but it's something like 41% compared to 20-something% for Kemp. So Perdue dominating and well on his way to victory. That's not what this Insider Advantage poll shows. This Insider Advantage poll shows a dead heat. And as you said, Scott, before any debates have really taken place and before we explore the various candidates' record.
Right. A split, that's pretty much, you can't get any more 34 symmetrical. Right. So that, and let's just look at I wish that we had pulled it without Perdue. I wish they had pulled it a third way without Perdue, because you had 22, what was the number, 41 to 22? The poll, the first poll? 41 to 22, yes. So without the endorsement, Donald Trump's endorsement for David Perdue is at 22 points.
Yeah.
And there was 20% undecided. And Kemp was at 41.
Yep.
That means that the party was already united. You split us, man. You split us. There is demonstrable evidence that you split us.
Yeah.
That we were united behind one guy, and you came in and acted like a pudding stick and stirred up the garbage. That's what you have done. You have split us. Congratulations to the Virginian, Newt Gingrich, the totally exonerated David Perdue, for doing the exact freaking opposite of what you said you were going to do. I'm over these old dudes who think they know every freaking thing, telling us, I don't even live there, but I'm concerned. So the numbers don't lie. It's your own freaking poll, by the way. Insider Advantage isn't going to be on Kemp's side on this.
So one of the things the Daily Beast reporter asked me was, he said, look, Newt Gingrich says that David Perdue can unite the party because the hardcore MAGA voters will never, under any circumstance, vote for Brian Kemp. And I said, well, look, that there may be some truth to that. I don't know. We'll see. But let's assume that's true for a minute. But here's the problem. On the other side of that, if David Perdue is going to run the kind of race that he signaled he's going to run, which is all about the stolen election and how he was robbed by Brian Kemp, and how Trump was robbed by Brian Kemp, that is going to turn off, for every MAGA voter that you gain, you turn off, I think, 2 to 1 other voters who are sick and tired of talking about that and want to know from David Perdue or Brian Kemp or whoever, or Stacey Abrams or whoever, what's your agenda for the people of Georgia and what are you going to do for this state?
Right.
And so for everyone every MAGA person you gain, you're going to lose more. Among the people, I think, who the Republicans most need to win back, which is suburban voters who aren't caught up in the daily grievances of Donald Trump, or care more about what's the economy going to do, what about my child's my child's education and all those sorts of things.
Right.
So who's going to talk about that? I think Brian Kemp, has a record to run on,
right.
That he will explore, and he will make. And I expect him to make that case. And David Perdue is going to be there saying, "Yeah, but the election was stolen and it's your fault."
Right.
Oh.
So we have to continue to talk about Trump's relationship with Kemp, and we're going to break some news tonight. I think we're going to talk about something nobody else has been talking about, and that was we're going to flash back to when Brian Kemp announced that he was going to reopen the closed aspects of the Georgia economy that had been closed. Specifically, there were only 4 things that had been closed, and that were bowling alleys, tattoo parlors, that bars and restaurants and things like that. So he announces he's going to do that. And the very next day, Donald Trump goes into the White House press briefing room and says, I told him I did not like this plan, this Brian Kemp, right? You remember?
Yes.
You remember when he did that?
Yes.
Well, several people have told me who were in the room when the vice president of the United States and the president of the United States were talking with the governor on speakerphone in the governor's conference room, where the president told Kemp at that time, love your plan. Sounds great. Let us know if you need anything. It's a beautiful plan, Governor. Beautiful plan. We love it. And then the media picks up. It's like, he's opening bowling alleys. What is he tattoo parlors? And he's going crazy, right? The media went crazy, and Trump, sensing, this isn't going well, I'm going to throw Kemp under the bus because I'm Donald Trump. He's Brian Kemp. And, the governor, he just took it on the chin, but that's what happened is you had the president of the United States throw the governor of Georgia under the bus. And you know what? The governor was right and the president was wrong, because our economy, it continues to flourish under the leadership of Brian Kemp compared to other states that would have implemented the same policies that Donald Trump had implemented. And there would have been no payoff for the health risks. So this is like the biggest thing for me for why I'm supporting Brian Kemp's reelection is his ability to navigate and thread the needle, frankly, on these 2 competing things of public health needs and concerns and keeping people financially stable so they can stay in their homes and pay their car notes and support their families.
Yeah.
Like he tried to balance that. And I really think he did a perfect job of balancing the needle. And he did so even when the president of the United States was throwing him under the bus from Washington, D.C.
Yep. So to that point, Scott, my employer, our Georgia Center for Opportunity, our director of research, Eric Randolph, just completed a study that he's been working on for a number of months, where he took COVID restrictions that various government entities, states, and major cities had placed on their populations during the pandemic, starting last March, comparing it to this March. He created a grading system on that. He compared it then to the job market and how various states are recovering. And then you cross-reference that with COVID deaths and hospitalizations. And a couple of things jumped out. As you mentioned, Georgia's economy is recovering better than most. Our job market, Georgia's job market is recovering better than most.
Yep.
Okay. And you see pretty clearly that the states, with a couple of exceptions, Hawaii, for example, is an outlier because so much of their economy depends upon tourism.
Correct.
But you look, the states that impose the harshest requirements, their job market is recovering much more slowly than other states. The states that, like Georgia, who tried to thread the needle, and other states, South Dakota, for example, that were much more lenient in there. But then when you look at it, it really had very little, almost no correlation to. It's very difficult to make the conclusion that the harsher restrictions saved deaths and hospitalization, and I think that's a harsh reality. And look, I don't blame anybody because, for the most part, because in the early days everybody was trying to figure out, how do you do this?
Yeah, sure.
But it became a false equivalency. It became, and I think this is what Brian Kemp perceived. Others, Ron DeSantis, governed in much the same way and gets a lot of the same grief that Brian Kemp gets, although not from Trump for some weird reason. Trump seems to have some particular fascination with the state of Georgia that he seems to hate us. But,
and let's just talk about this for 1 second, make a point, and then we'll move on to the next thing, which is, even if he had won Georgia, he's still not president. He didn't have 270.
Yeah,
he didn't get there. So
he needed Arizona and Nevada and
he needed at least
Michigan,
3 other states.
And he was a long way from winning.
So why he hates us so bad, and I'm going to throw this out there, and this, honestly, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is Glenn Youngkin and Winsome Sears were just elected on the same machines that we're using here.
Yeah.
So if they're so susceptible to fraud, why weren't the Democrats doing that to save the entire state practically over there in Virginia this time around? Yeah. Come on, man. Right. Did I use that phrase right?
As Joe Biden might say, come on, man.
Come on, man.
Bunch of malarkey.
All right. So one more thing about the David Perdue announcement is that he said he would, if he was governor, he would have called for a special session of the legislature to overturn the election. And Cody Hall, the spokesman for the governor, issued a statement tonight saying
the governor's campaign, right? He was with the governor's campaign. Just recently moved over to the campaign.
Yes, still a spokesperson for the governor.
Yes, but more political in nature now. So which explains this,
which allows him to be more free in his language, I guess, less diplomatic. But he called David Perdue a liar and a failed politician because David Perdue had told Brian Kemp, when Brian Kemp reached out to ask him, should I call a special session for you? And David Perdue told the governor, no, don't call a special session. Now, earlier this week, I didn't post about it, but earlier this week, I got a call from a congressional staffer who has knowledge of this conversation, who told me this absolutely happened. And that Cody went public with it today allows me to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I have confirmed that this actually happened, that David Perdue told Brian Kemp, do not call a special session, which, by the way, I would have had to attend as a state rep. So I'm glad he didn't because it would have been miserable. But that all that being said, what do you make of it, Buzz? Is this just standard campaign fodder, or is this something that can be proven? Where are we going to hear more about it?
I think it's, look, we just said we got 7 months of this. This will probably be, the way this is going in the first couple of days, this may be forgotten in a week. But I think it's with this and what I mentioned to you earlier, that somebody in the know told me that, up until recently, moments ago, Perdue was blaming Trump for his loss, not Brian Kemp, and suddenly now he's going public. And if more of these types of things come out, you've got a pattern here of a person who does one thing privately and another thing publicly, for political gain, and that's not a good look. That's not, that's not when you're running for governor and you're saying, well, if you're David Perdue and you're saying you have to fire this guy Brian Kemp and hire me because I am tougher and will stand firm, which was part of his message in his little video. I would have stood firm against Stacey Abrams and not let her, manipulate and steal our elections. But yet, more and more stories continue to come out that in private you're doing something totally different. To me, it undermines the claim of the point of your candidacy.
Right. Especially if over that, I mean, if you're going to make that your primary thing and you had an opportunity, the governor was giving you the opportunity to weigh in and you told him, don't do it.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll add to this.
I mean, I guess one thing to add. All right. You're Stacey Abrams, you're running and you're saying, Brian Kemp, I would have handled the pandemic this way. I would have done this policy. I disagree with you on that policy, and it's laid out before the public, and the public can decide which agenda and which way of handling things they prefer. Mm-hmm. This is, a guy who is saying one thing behind closed doors, and then, I don't know what else to think other than think Donald Trump twisted his arm, and now he's out here saying other things because it makes MAGA world happy.
I think that's it.
But that's not your true beliefs. Stacey, right. Look, for whatever we think of Stacey Abrams and her views, I have no reason to believe, and I have zero evidence to think to contradict it, that when she puts forward it says, I would have done this, that I don't think we have any reason to doubt that that's what she would have done if she were governor.
Right.
She believes what she says. Here's two things where we have real doubts about what David Perdue is saying. Would he really have done that if he had been governor?
Right. And, here's to move on a little bit, we have a whole group of people right now who are saying one thing and then backtracking. Right.
Yeah.
And one of those is the former ambassador and famous Georgian, Randy Evans, who we talked about in this podcast last time I was on, about how he had pledged public support for Brian Kemp.
Yeah.
And because I commented on his post, I remember seeing it. Where he said, that Brian Kemp and Marty were lifelong friends, and he looks forward to supporting and helping him through the primary and the election against whoever the Democrats put up at the time. And now he is saying he hasn't outright said David Perdue's the guy, but actually his post does actually say that. His post went on to let's see if I can find it really fast.
Well, he was critical of Cody Hall's initial reaction, the Kemp campaign's initial reaction to Perdue announcing, right? Because it was a hard hitting response.
Of course, it was.
It brought up the stock trades that you alluded to earlier, Scott. It brought up that he couldn't beat John Ossoff, and how's he going to beat? As I recall, how's he going to beat Stacey Abrams if he couldn't beat John Ossoff? So yeah,
right. And so this is what he posted. He posted, if the party comes together, Perdue will be the nominee, and he'll go on to be governor. And if the party comes apart, which if the bitterness and divisiveness continues with this kind of rhetoric, then Kemp will be the nominee and Stacey will be the governor. And I fixed that for him. I went and did the editing to make it factual so that he would have the opportunity to see what the truth actually looks like, which is if the party comes together, Perdue will endorse Kemp, and then Kemp will go on to be reelected governor. And if the party comes apart, then the bitterness and divisiveness continues as a result of Perdue challenging Kemp, and then Stacey will be the governor.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think Randy Evans has been it's not an exaggeration, I think, to say he's been a towering figure in Georgia Republican politics for a long time. He was, Newt Gingrich's speaker, Newt Gingrich's attorney back when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. That means he was there during the Gingrich Revolution that ended decades of Democratic dominance in the United States Congress. He's an important figure in Georgia politics here for Republicans, at least. And it's I don't know. I think this is probably one of many events that we're going to experience like this over the next 7 months. It makes me sad.
Yeah, you're so diplomatic. I'm just going to put it out there. Jake Evans is running for Congress. That's his son in the 6th district. And that Trump endorsement sounds mighty good for my boy Jake.
Yeah, but okay, let's talk about that. Point back to that Insider Advantage poll. It was a 12-point bump for David Perdue from his baseline. He was at 22%. After people knew about Trump's endorsement, he's at 34%. That's not the kick butt and take name kind of endorsement.
Just saying.
And especially in that newly configured 6th district, it's not. Certain parts of it certainly are Trump land. Other parts are not. So yeah, I mean to do this sort of stuff, Donald Trump seems to make people do to get people into this position where they pretty much say and do anything to get his blessing and his loyalty. Certain people, at least. You
never want to question somebody's
character. I hope that's
character.
not what's happening here.
You never want to question somebody's character, but when they do something that opens the door to that, it's fair game, right? When you post a week ago that you're supporting Brian Kemp in his reelection, and then you make a quote to whatever newspaper that was that where you said that David Perdue will unite the party and Brian Kemp will be the nominee and Stacey will be governor. When you said that, you opened your character up for questioning, because the series of events, if you had never said that you were for Brian Kemp, if you had never publicly made any comment that you were for Brian Kemp, and then you came out for Perdue, no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
But when
I suppose Newt Gingrich is in that position, right?
Right. I mean,
he didn't.
What?
He didn't backtrack an endorsement.
Right. I'm not questioning Newt's character. I'm questioning his sanity. And the fact that he doesn't live here and he's all concerned.
Yeah, he's drawing wrong conclusions, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't have the data set to make that any type of analysis of Georgia. He hasn't lived here this millennium. So he's out of touch with what's happening here. He really is. And he clearly doesn't see the successfulness of the Kemp administration in running this state.
Yeah.
Otherwise there would be no question, when things are going so well here, compared to.
Well, I guess, look, kind of somewhat related to this, I think, is Trump's initial statement after Perdue got in the race included a little line that said that if Brian Kemp wins, then obviously it was rigged.
Right. I mean, of course,
so
it has to. Yeah.
Already, first of all, doing the same things that he did that helped take down David Perdue on January 5th, depressing his own base and support.
Right.
And I suppose we should mention the little Twitter spat that David Schaefer and Eric Erickson got into.
I participated in that.
And you joined in as well. But I mean, look, the problem with what, so I guess setting this up, Eric Erickson was making the point. Eric, forget the exact numbers. Eric said something like there were 700 and something thousand.
It's 473. People.
Yeah, so Erickson's number was a little inflated. Schaefer comes in and says, no, it was this. But Schaefer went on to make the point that, well, that was Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians who did not vote.
Right.
And he's right. If you go back and look at the analysis done by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, you see that voter turnout was down further in Republican areas of the state, and really other analysis shows in that northwest part of the state, represented by our dear friend, she who must not be named, because she was out there at the forefront of the Stop the Steal stuff and how she was going to block the election, and in other areas around the state where the Stop the Steal was most prevalent. And where was that? That was not in Democratic or Libertarian parts of the state. That was in Republican parts of the state. So it's very reasonable to assume that of that 420 or whatever thousand people who did not show up, that more of them were Republicans than there were Democrats sitting at home.
We have a mutual friend who's a data analysis person that did the analysis, and they went through voter by voter, and they were paid to do this. It was their job. They work for a nonprofit to look at this type of data. 319,000 Republicans.
Yeah.
That were identified as Republicans who voted in the general election did not turn back out.
Yeah.
When the margin was 50,000 for Kelly Loeffler, and I think
99,000 or 90-something thousand for Perdue, for Ossoff to beat Perdue.
So the number,
if half those people a third of those people that showed up at the polls,
right?
And there's two Republican senators from Georgia.
And here's the other thing too: like they took those people, they identified them for the race to replace Burt Reeves when Burt Reeves resigned from the House. They had a special election, and there was a special effort pointed at those people who didn't turn back out. They were identified through the data set, and then specifically targeted, please come back. And they told the campaigns, we're not coming back. Donald Trump told us not to.
So
we have a big hole to overcome anyway. And
so let's extrapolate on that a little bit. Because I remember not long ago, She Who Must Not Be Named, a poll was taken in her district that showed 9% of Republicans said they will not vote in 2022.
Right.
And this scared her and worried her, because she knows that 9%, it won't make a difference in against a Democrat. It won't cause her to lose. But she knows that those are her people. Those are people who would otherwise support her. And you get into a Republican primary, that 9% that becomes an outsized disadvantage for her. Extrapolate that to the governor's race. That 9%, they were not, that 9% of people, they're not going to come out for Brian Kemp. They're mad at Brian Kemp. They agree with David Perdue that Brian Kemp blew it and lost the election, that Brian Kemp should have done all these extra legal and unconstitutional things to overturn the election in favor of Donald Trump. They would not. They're not going. Those are votes not lost for Brian Kemp in a Republican primary. Those are votes lost that are not available to David Perdue.
Right.
So you know,
right.
Sure, Insider Advantage can poll 500 people and say it's a dead heat. When you get out to, and if Donald Trump continues this kind of talk, and David Perdue runs a campaign continuing to remind people that the 2020 election was rigged or whatever tactic they're going to take, he's depressing his own vote.
He absolutely is. And if you're Vernon Jones, you went, what? Right.
One of my favorite, you know that meme of the dude who's holding hands with a girl, and he looks over his shoulder and sees another girl.
Yeah.
There was one. It was Donald Trump holding hands with Vernon Jones, turning his head toward David Perdue. Yeah. And poor old Vernon is left out in the cold here.
What do you do if you're Vernon Jones, right? I mean, apparently he's still in.
Yeah. But he issued a statement saying, look, they're two peas in a pod, meaning
Perdue
Kemp,
and Kemp.
I don't know the exact words, but Kemp and Perdue are the same corrupt person, and he's the only true MAGA person. So,
and he's not wrong.
Apparently, Donald Trump blew
Honestly,
it.
Though, is he wrong to say that at this point? I mean, if that's the reason you're voting for somebody, I mean, I can unequivocally tell you that Vernon Jones is the most MAGA person in that race. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
so
you don't have to take my word for it. You can do your own research, but I will tell you that Vernon Jones is the most MAGA person in this governor's race.
Well, that probably explains why. Look, you and I are both maybe unwillingly, but we now received emails from Debbie Dooley. She has stated that she is standing firm.
110% with Vernon.
110% with Vernon.
Because Vernon started a movement.
Yep, Vernon started a movement. So, you know, and that she has heard everyone that she has talked to continues to support Vernon Jones. So, yeah.
Well, it's easy to claim that when you don't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I mean, that's neither here nor there. Yeah. Whatever it is that you do next, Vernon, go forth and.
Okay. So I do have to say this. A friend told me that it was reported. I haven't confirmed this myself, that Vernon Jones was considering switching and running for state school superintendent.
Unfounded rumors. We don't want him to do that.
Oh, pardon?
We don't want him to do that.
Oh, we don't want him to do that. No.
Okay.
But that he was considering that. So I don't know. My first initial reaction was, well, we don't have a MAGA person in that race to run and lose to the Democrats. So
John Bard certainly is not a MAGA guy.
No, John Bard's not MAGA. Richard Woods is not MAGA.
No.
So that every race needs a MAGA candidate to potentially lose to the Democrats. So
right.
Why not? We got one in every other race, so why not? Why not that one?
Multiple, apparently. At least people who are claiming to be. So, Buzz, we're getting close to the holiday season, and the year's wrapping up. What are you reading? What are you watching? Is there anything good, streaming that you're enjoying?
Well, I'm reading a book that my mom gave me. Sorry, the author's name slipped my mind. He's a fairly well-known journalist, but his book. Well, I'm reading two books actually. The first one is about it's making the case that 1974 was a pivotal year in American culture, in movies, music, and television. And he's starting to build the case that was the case, and it's interesting. I guess I never really previously thought that the early that the 70s contributed much to the culture in a positive way. But
Star Wars, baby, Star Wars.
Well, that's true. Mid 70s, Star Wars transfer, but that wasn't 74, 77.
77.
Yeah. So
Elvis died in 77.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting book, and it's making that case. I'm interested. It's about 400 pages. I'm about 120 pages in. So, but another book I'm listening to. I listened to Jonathan Karl. I heard him on a podcast. ABC White House correspondent. There's been a slew of books coming out about the last days of the Trump presidency. I read Molly Hemingway's book called Rigged. I actually recommend that book. It's a very good book. It's not. She's not making the case that the election was rigged in the sense that votes were stolen, et cetera, but she makes a pretty convincing case that the Democrats, excuse me, the Democrats for a number of years have fought battles in legislatures, but mostly in courts, to create a more favorable electoral climate for themselves, and then added on top of that the pandemic. And Zuckerberg throwing large amounts of money around, and that they were, this is, sort of think this is how I was thinking about what happened in 2020, and that the Democrats absolutely maximized all of those things, all legal, to their advantage to win the election and get their people to the polls. So that's an interesting book. But in that book, she makes a very strong defense of Trump's policies and presidency, the policies that he advanced during his presidency, which many of those you and I agree with. But so I listened to that, a very pro-Trump book, and now I'm listening to Jonathan Karl's book called Betrayal. And it kind of has a twofold meaning. In his view, Donald Trump betrayed America. He was given this gift of being president of the United States, and he didn't use it for the public good and for the good of all Americans. He did it for himself. But then there's the dual meaning of that Donald Trump, I'm about halfway through the book, and he's making the case that Donald Trump feels that everybody on earth betrayed him except his family. And even some of them are on thin ice. And that he's bent on revenge, and I think we're witnessing that in Georgia. He's absolutely bent on revenge against all those he thinks betrayed him, and right at the top of that list is Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp.
Sure,
unfortunately for us. But
I'm not watching or reading anything political right now. I'm
good for you.
I've devoted many hours of my life at this point to watching Get Back, the Beatles documentary on Disney Plus.
Oh, how's that?
It's phenomenal. Okay. First of all,
Peter Jackson directed, right? So
Peter Jackson, 150 hours of video, 180 hours or something of audio, and it's crisp. It's like you're in the room with them. And it
Wow.
was shot on 16 millimeter. So it took him 4 years to basically feed the footage into computers, and AI did the rest. And it's
Wow.
almost like deep fake technology
Mm-hmm.
that they've used to reestablish this. But Paul McCartney walks in and it's like you're in the room with him,
Wow.
you know, when him and John Lennon are just goofing off. I mean, it's amazing. I've watched it 1.5 times through already. I watched it by myself on the flight out to San Diego and back. And then I watched it again. It's like my wife is a Beatles fan. So I was like, you have to watch this. I sat with her and watched the first 2 episodes again. And I'll probably watch it 3 or 4 more times because there's something their artistic process is fascinating to me. At one point, Ringo and George are sitting there yawning, looking at Paul just kind of playing around. He does left-handed with his bass.
Yeah.
And Get Back just appears. It just appears like out of nothing. And then you see Ringo get behind the drums and George pick up his guitar and they just start. And it's like, it sounds very similar to what the final product. It is like the first time they'd ever played it. And it sounded, and then like an hour later, John Lennon walks in, picks up his guitar and they're still playing. And he's like, all right, I can join in. And it's like, he knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And these 4 guys were able to create that way.
Yeah.
Was amazing.
Wow.
And, I've always liked the Beatles. I don't know that I have the appreciation for them and their talent. I don't know that I had it the way I do now that I've seen this, and it also shows that sort of the tension between them because this was their last session before they broke up.
Wow.
And at one point, George Harrison leaves the band and you don't really see a big argument. There's no fisticuffs. It was reported in the newspaper that John and George had fought each other, that they had thrown fists at each other, and it just never happened. It was George got up at lunchtime and said, I'll be leaving the band now. And he got left.
Very British, right? Very
I'll
British.
be leaving the band now. And when they're arguing, right? It was so polite. Like when you and I argue, I'm like, no, that's not how it is. Right. When you and I are fighting, or like, when we hug it out later, these guys were like, well, have you thought that maybe we should try it that way? Oh, you haven't? Well, maybe. How do you feel about it? Oh, okay. Well, let's do that then. Okay. All right. We'll give it a go. And then they do it and nobody likes it. And he's like, oh, I don't know if that worked. Yeah, you're right. It didn't work. But inside, right, all of that created this tension in these guys. Yeah. And they were raging at each other inside.
Wow.
But you would never know it by watching. And they had hidden microphones in flower pots. So they caught conversations that they didn't know were being recorded. I mean, they had no idea just how much under surveillance they were during this process. And the other thing too is occasionally they'll sit there, they'll be talking to each other and they'll start strumming random nonsense just to drown out the microphone. Well, Peter Jackson was able to isolate their voices using AI. and you could hear just their voices, even though they're playing instruments. Yeah.
Wow.
So you could hear all these private conversations they didn't mean for the world to hear, but they've gotten to a point in age now where, Ringo and George specifically, or Ringo and Paul have gotten to an age where like, I don't really care what the world thinks of me. I'm freaking Paul McCartney.
Well, I think it shows you the greatness, how important that band was, that here all these years later, 40 years, 50 years later,
50 years later,
we're still talking about them. And then that a documentary about them was, probably one of the more popular things that Disney Plus has going. So I've got it in my queue. I haven't watched it yet. Got it in my queue.
It's like 7 hours long between 3 episodes. It's incredible. It's just a lot of music, just sit down and, you can play it in the background really, but there are key moments where there's no voiceover. There's only text explaining the context of certain situations. Yeah. Which you will miss if you're just listening in the background. But I mean, listen to it, watch it more than one time. So
have you ever seen, I guess when you talked about this, the process that Peter Jackson went through to make this, did you ever see another one he did called They Shall Not Grow Old? It was about It was made on the 150th anniversary, a couple years ago now, 150th anniversary of World War I. And he had gone through, he's hired by the British, I forget which museum, but the British museum had all this footage, film of World War I, and then audio. They had gone in maybe the 1960s or so and done a lot of interviews with World War I veterans. So they had that audio of the veterans, and then they had the video. Of course, that was the hand cranked stuff, and so it varied in speed. So he had to go through and get that to a regular speed that looked where it looked like people were really walking, and then overlaid that with interviews with soldiers, and then hired some lip readers to read lips of some of the people, and it was incredible. One of the better documentaries I've ever seen about World War I. But it sounds like a similar method in that there's not a narrator; it's them, it's the people, in their voice speaking to you. Yep. And it's fascinating. I like it. I like that method a lot. It's more very informative, and
it's fascinating. Go watch it. You'll enjoy it. And if you're listening, let me know what you think. Send me an email, shoot me a message. Let me know what you think of the Disney Plus on the Beatles. Thank you all for watching. We've taken up enough of your time.
Yep.
Like, subscribe, recommend us to your friends. You can get this podcast on anywhere where you get your podcasts. Spotify.
Yep.
YouTube. Yeah. Facebook.
Peachpundit.com.
And if you're
Facebook page.
If you've hung around in the live broadcast, thank you very much. We appreciate you for being here. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.